No, it's not on Barnes. Oh, we got a technical foul, and they just threw someone out of the game.
Oh no, Scottie Barnes ejected at the end of the game. The Raptors lose to the Denver Nuggets last night, 118-113, and what was a controversial end to the game. We'll get into that. I'm Albert Vartanian, James Sharman here for the Homestand show. Coming up on the show, we're going to speak with Joshua Kloke of The Athletic. We're going to get an update on Ryan O'Reilly and what's going on with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Also joining us, Randy Urban, host of Raptors Tonight, to talk about what you just saw there. That was Scottie Barnes ejected last night against the Nuggets, as I mentioned. Scott Foster, his name getting a lot of play time right now.
Ooh,
and
synonymous,
if you're a referee, you don't want your name being thrown around that way. But for Foster, maybe so.
Yeah, he's got a reputation, right, around the league. I know Raptors Nation is getting all up in arms about this call, and it seemed extremely harsh, no doubt about it. But apparently the words, cheats was uttered under Scottie Barnes' breath, right, which isn't cool. Even if it's not directed towards the officials, if they're in earshot, you got to figure out these things, right? Especially you know the reputation of the referee as well, right? So you got to be more professional.
Yeah.
Let's be honest here. But it was still very harsh and was a contributing factor, not the only factor why they lost the game.
Yeah, Scott Foster in his pool report said he was ejected. Scottie Barnes was ejected on one technical foul because he used verbiage which directly questioned the integrity of the crew.
When you start using the word verbiage,
right,
you need to shut up. Right?
Scott Foster's
it's very
kind of known
arrogant.
for this. Yes, I mean,
verbiage.
if you watch the clip, you can hear Scottie Barnes say, "Y'all cheating, bro." So I think the magic word there is cheating.
Yeah.
Didn't like the way he was approaching him. At the same time, Scott Foster was walking away, right? At what point do you tell a referee just not to engage? Keep going.
Yeah, but if you still hear it, just because your back's turned and then the guy says something, even under his breath or towards you, he's still saying it. It's still verbiage.
Right.
Isn't it? So I think you know the situation, you know how close the game is, you know how important you are at that stage in the game. You don't want to give it three free throws away, which is what he did, and they scored them all. So I think, it's all very well to point fingers here and blame the official. I get that, but at the same time, it's a learning experience, I think, for Scottie Barnes as his education in professional basketball continues.
Yeah, he tends to get in referees' ears a lot. When you're a sophomore, you're not going to get the calls that you want. Right, the referees are going to remember who you are.
Yeah.
But there was some questionable calls. I mean, think about the Nuggets getting 9 free throws inside the last 1:15 of the fourth quarter. The Raps didn't lose the game just on those calls, but it was a big-time contributive factor.
Yeah, but Jakob Perl also missed two
big free throws
down the stretch there as well, right? Really important moment. Yeah. So it's, we can always blame other people. I think it's time, that sports teams take responsibility themselves, and I think Nick Nurse knows that.
Yeah.
And he'll preach that to his players. Listen, they're playing the best team in the West. They played a really good game. They were unfortunate at the end there.
Right.
But I thought overall, they should be proud of themselves, but it's too bad it did end that way.
No, you're right. They went toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in the West, and I think there's a lot more positives to pull from that game rather than what happened with Scott Foster. I know producer Sean, he's got some dirt on Scottie Foster. He's done this in the past before with certain players, Sean?
Yeah, so, I mean, he's got a problem with, Chris Paul, and he's got a problem with James Harden. People call him, the series extender, He comes in, he comes into these NBA playoff games, and as of 2022, teams facing a deficit in games ref by Scott Foster were 2-19 or something like that.
Wow.
Or sorry, 19-2. They had won 19 games, so he would extend the series. Is the narrative that people are saying? Chris Paul, I believe, is 0-14 in playoff games ref by Scott Foster. And again, some of this could just be luck, coincidence. I don't think he's doing anything egregious like a Tim Donaghy or anything like that, but no other sport other than the NBA, to me at least, do stars get the majority of the calls, and do referees have the biggest impact on games in any sport. That's how I see it. LeBron gets calls, Giannis gets calls, Joel Embiid get calls, and Joel Embiid, he's in the paint a lot, and he can create a lot of contact, but Scottie's not getting those calls. And even to an extent, former Raptor Kyle Lowry, he was notorious for complaining to the referees, and he wouldn't get a lot of calls either. So I don't know if it's a Toronto thing or if it's just an NBA refs wanting the spotlight, but Scott Foster, I don't know, last night seemed like he could have just kept walking away, but instead he had to make himself seen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the NBA, this happens a lot. And if you're going to beak out a referee, you're not going to get the calls that you want. And it might get flipped the other way. I mean, if you go back to even like the Jordan days, there's a clip. It was Michael Jordan when he was on the Washington Wizards. He runs up to the referee and says, "Hey, that was a foul." He's like, "Was it Mike? Was it Mike?" Boom. And he blows a whistle. And he's like, "Oh, sorry, Mike." So that happens in the NBA. This isn't,
It seems
this
the
isn't
NBA,
new.
I mean, it's also a stars league, right? More than any other sport in the world.
LeBron's getting those calls.
Yeah, exactly. Like Sean mentioned there, stars do generally get the calls in the league, but then the Chris Paul stat suggests otherwise in the big games.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it seems to me that in the NBA, the referees have more personality than other leagues. I know in hockey there's none, very few, and in fact, recent years they've really cut down, not allowing players to, get into the faces of referees. Right. In soccer, the sport I watched for cover so many years, there aren't too many personalities now. There were. Mark Clattenburg was a big one, of course. He went to Saudi Arabia. He was criticized too much. So maybe the NBA is taking over. Are they stars too? They shouldn't be stars, right?
A little bit, yeah. But anyway, we'll talk about more on that game with Randy Urban later on in the show. Quickly on the Toronto Maple Leafs, Ryan O'Reilly. He's had successful surgery on a broken finger. He's set to return in about 4 weeks. So that's a good sign for Leaf fans who are hoping that he'll be back soon.
Yeah, and good news for JT there, of course, because he's out tonight as well.
Yeah.
So there has some issues there. But a month out, it's not ideal. But like we spoke about, you said with CJ, you can stay in shape, at least with a broken finger. Successful surgery. What's done successful surgery? The wrong finger?
Maybe he lost a finger. They did the wrong finger.
I don't know.
Maybe they did his foot. Who knows? But the Leafs are in action tonight against the Devils. We will talk about that. Also, big news. Ilya Samsonov in net tonight for the Toronto Maple Leafs. We'll break that down coming up next.
Is that big news?
Nah.
He has a broken finger. He'll go on LTI. And, in terms of the full diagnosis and timeline, we'll have a better idea of that. He's seeing a specialist, I think, as we speak, back in Toronto right now. So we'll know more about it there. But obviously, not sure exactly what the LTI timeline is, but he won't be eligible for that period of time. And we'll get him back up and running as soon as we can.
Ryan O'Reilly out. He officially has had surgery on his finger. Successful surgery, so they had surgery on the right one, apparently.
That's definitely not his foot.
He'll be out for 4 weeks. We have Joshua Kloke from The Athletic coming on the show later on to talk about that and give us the latest on Ryan O'Reilly. But the Leafs in New Jersey tonight. Road Dogs, by the way, plus 114 to win the game. Big game for them. It's going to be a huge game considering you're missing Tavares and Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Shen, who's back in Vancouver awaiting the birth of his child. But we have some questions here, and I think we should probably get to them. I mean, considering that the Leafs, they've afforded themselves the opportunity to know who they're going to play in the first round, which is going to be the Tampa Bay Lightning. You're in the playoffs. At this moment, do you think they should take a page out of the Toronto Raptors book and use load management on some of these stars?
Load management, eh? Or Alex McKechnie's master.
Or is that a faux pas? No, don't do it.
Should they do it? Yeah, probably. It makes a lot of sense. I hope they don't do it. I don't like the concept of load management. I know NBA is really, renowned for it nowadays. And the bottom line is, if you're a fan, right, and you're paying extortionate amounts of money to see these athletes, and you show up for a Leaf game and they're resting Austin Matthews, resting him.
Right.
It would drive me up the wall. It would drive me crazy. So I'm paying to see Austin Matthews.
But you know what, Charms? The Raptors did it, and it was successful
because they won a championship.
Right.
Had they not won the championship? And I know people that went to games and Kawhi was being rested, and they were furious. So what the hell? I spent $200 for a crappy ticket in the gods, and I can't even see Kawhi?
Yeah.
So, but I understand in modern sports, the number of games there are, how physical the playoffs are. I understand why players and medical staff are pressured into doing that. But I just don't like it. I mean, do you appreciate it? Are you a fan of it?
I mean, I can understand if they decide to do it. Am I a fan of load management? No. I mean, as a paying fan, if I'm going to watch the game, no. I mean, there's a couple times I went to watch Raptors games where LeBron was in town and he didn't play. Same thing with the Kawhi Leonard thing. But I understand, like, if the Leafs want to do it, considering they have some serious injuries at the moment. I mean, we're going to talk about Austin Matthews later on, but he doesn't look 100%.
No.
Is that the type of player that you would put under load management?
If you're injured, if he's injured or he's hurt or there's a niggling injury, then I understand that. Rest him. That to me isn't so much load management. You're just resting. You're trying to get him healthier for the playoffs because of an injury. Mm-hmm. If it's a Mark Giordano, for example, who's in his late 30s and probably could do with a couple of nights off, that to me is load management, right? I understand that more an older player, but if you're, Matthews or Mitch Marner and you're in your early to mid 20s, you can play 82 games,
Right.
And then you can play the playoffs, right? Not with the young guys. The older guys, okay. Even Kawhi, I know he's a veteran. All right, begrudgingly, I'll accept it.
Yeah.
But not for a young player.
Yeah, there's some predicted lines for the Leafs tonight if we can pull up that board. And just looking at these predicted lines, without an O'Reilly, without a Tavares, it's much, much weaker.
We did the same board, though, a week ago. We're going, wow, look at these lines.
Yeah,
They're
no
amazing.
kidding.
And now it's changed a fair bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, and one thing that really stands out there is Kerfoot. Alex Kerfoot on the first line. Michael Bunting demoted to the fourth line. And we'll pose this question later on to Joshua Kloke, but this is clearly Sheldon Keefe, I believe, sending a message to Bunting.
Yeah, probably. I mean, he hasn't played that well. I think no goals in 7 games.
That's Bunting's spot on the first line. There's no way that this quote-unquote experiment with Kerfoot on the first line is going to stick.
No, I'm sure he'll be put back in the first line, but I like him in that bottom 6, though, don't you?
Bunting?
Yeah, and he's got a pop in his stick.
But then who's that left winger on the first line?
I know. Well, yeah, I know. But I say moving forward, though, I think he's more suited to be a bottom 6 type player. He's abrasive, got some sandpaper there,
Right.
very edgy. But he's got some pop in his stick, and beside Austin Matthews, he scores you 20 goals a year. That's great. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, by the time the playoffs come around, I'm sure he's back in that first line. Although good for Alex Kerfoot. I feel bad for this guy. He's so versatile that it's his curse as well. He never gets a chance to run at a certain position. He makes $3.5 a year. He got that contract for a reason.
And
right?
that's why he takes heat from fans.
Yeah, that's exactly why he takes heat from fans, right? Oh, $3.5, we could pay that somewhere else. But I think he's a good player. He's quick. He just needs some confidence, right? And even in last year's playoffs, the first 2 or 3 games, he was very good.
Mm-hmm.
Then he quietened down, the whole team did. But yeah, I'm happy to see him back in the first line, but it won't be for long. You're right. I think he'll end up back in that 3rd or 4th line, and they'll bunt him back up.
Yeah, Bunting, 1 goal, 3 points in his last 7. Kerfoot, his last point in a game came back against Chicago, so quite some time ago. It's very long.
Really? Which that was
the Patrick Kane game.
Oh, that one?
Yes.
Oh, was it really?
It's been a while, so that's what I'm saying.
While,
the finishing for Alex Kerfoot hasn't been great. Here's actually Sheldon Keefe talking about his decision to make that move.
I want him to be able to just focus on his game, get back to skating with the puck and making plays and being confident with it. That's really it. So I think you can put him in a different spot where, to me, you look at it, I think he can really be a driver of that line and be a leader on the line. And it's, like I said, most importantly, it's a chance for him to just, focus on his game, getting back to being the player that we know he can be in terms of playmaking ability, in terms of finishing ability, competitiveness, speed, all those kind of things. Just really get back to that. I think he's clearly been there's a bit of a mental block there for him right now, and we're trying to help him through that. So he's an important guy. I got full confidence he'll end up back with Matthews before long, but I think this is an important period here that we give him every chance to really find his game and get it to where we need it to be.
Of course, the silver lining here is that if he has a poor end to the season, he's up for a new contract, right? Maybe more affordable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's irony, isn't it, that finally they get some reinforcements for him. They bring in Lafferty and Acciari, guys who are hard-nosed as well. It's not just up to Bunting to shoulder the load physically, and he loses his form completely.
Yeah.
It's a strange old game, sports.
But the thing with Bunting that, compared to those guys you just mentioned, he can find the back of the net. I mean, maybe if you can make the argument that you put anybody with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner or Michael Nylander,
Michael's his
father?
dad.
Was his father?
Michael could too.
I love him.
He'd be great beside Matthews.
Yeah, so my point being, if you put him with Michael Nylander, you're probably a pretty good player too. But you put him with any of those guys, you should be scoring points on that top line.
Yeah, I mean, do you think you could score points in the top line?
No, I'm a horrible
you beside
hockey player.
Matthews?
I am a horrible hockey player.
I bet you could get some points beside Matthews, though.
I'm like a poor man's Johan Franzen. I stand in front of the net. If a puck hits me with the side of the head and goes in, that counts.
Like a really poor man,
really
Johan
poor.
Franzen. He was a good power play guy.
He was a great guy for Detroit Red Wings. You want to touch on Kyle Dubas?
Yeah.
Obviously, he's waiting. I'm assuming he's awaiting a contract extension or to re-sign with the club. Should they do it now? Should they wait? Are they going to wait on a first round?
I just found it really interesting what CJ was saying yesterday on the show. He was saying how, yes, it's one thing about the Leafs re-signing Dubas, but maybe Dubas wants to stick around and be a free agent as well and choose where he goes. Because if he doesn't sign a new deal, he will move to any club he wants, I think, in some capacity, right?
Probably.
He's very respected. So I would sign him right now. I think he's done enough. He's shown what he can do. But at the same time, it's a results-oriented business.
Yeah.
As the old awful cliche goes.
Playing devil's advocate, I've heard people say, well, look at the team that's going to be put on the ice tonight. Kerfoot on the top line, Bunting on the last line, Lafferty on the second line. This is what Dubas gave this team. I know you're missing some key players, but he didn't address
But
maybe
really
some
key
spots.
players. 2 of your top 3 centers.
Right.
You take that out of any team in the league, your lines might look a little bit weird.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah. And I think for Dubas, like, if he wins a round, that saves his job. I don't really understand that.
Yeah, no, yeah, precisely. I think he's done the work. We've seen what the team does every single regular season. They go to game 7s against really good teams, and they haven't got it done, right? And that's fair enough. Maybe it's the maturation of the team itself. That's not on Carl Dubas. I think he's changed his philosophy too over the years. It was all about skill and speed and maybe smaller guys, right? He's changed that, right? He's brought in some more heft now, some bigger players, more edge. So he's evolved on the job as well. I think he's absolutely the right guy for the job, and I'd be very surprised if he doesn't return next year.
Yeah, and I will be surprised as well. But I'm with you. I think if they're going to decide to re-sign him, do it now rather than later. I mean,
Yeah.
this is obviously looming over his head, but
But maybe he's not. Maybe he's the one saying, I will wait until the end of the season. Maybe there's a contract right there waiting for him.
Right.
Maybe. We don't know that.
yeah, I mean, the Leafs need to make some noise in the playoffs. It'll be very difficult against the Tampa Bay Lightning. But if the Lightning keep playing that the way that they are right now,
Hopefully.
you never know what happens with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Coming up in the next block, we will chat with Joshua Kloke of The Athletic. All right, welcome back to the Homestand Show. Albert Vartanian, James Sharman. Now joining us is Joshua Kloke, staff writer for The Athletic. He's in New Jersey tonight for Toronto taking on the Devils. And Josh, you got some good news for Leaf fans in terms of what's going on with Ryan O'Reilly.
Yeah, I think it can be interpreted as good news. So he had surgery on his broken finger this morning. Sheldon Keefe said this morning that the surgery was successful and that he's got a timeline of 4 weeks to return. So if you adhere to that 4-week timeline, that still gives him about 6 games left in the regular season. So I think that is good news, right? Sheldon Keefe stressed yesterday in practice that, the player was acquired for the playoffs, right? The Leafs are an elite team before, Ryan O'Reilly was acquired, and they're bringing him in, in part because of his playoff experience. We know he's a Conn Smythe winner. And I think if you're the Leafs, you hope that he can rely on that experience to kind of seamlessly get back into the lineup. I think you look at the other pieces they acquired, those are still kind of moving parts in terms of where do you put them, right? Like where does Luke Shen fit in the playoff lineup? Where does Sam Lafferty fit? But I think with Ryan O'Reilly, that you could probably play him in that second line center role, move John Tavares to the wing, or you can play him in that third line role as more of a defensively minded unit. So yeah, I guess if you're Leafs fans, you probably shouldn't worry too much considering what some of the other kind of outcomes could have been.
Yeah, but they're going to be worrying a lot about this.
That's just second nature.
Par for the course, right? And I think when they signed O'Reilly and they signed Lafferty, I didn't think they expected to see Lafferty as the second line center against New Jersey. That's for sure, right?
No, not as a second line center, but I think the Leafs, when they scouted Lafferty with the Blackhawks, I think what really stuck out to them was Lafferty's ability to play against tough opposition in that center role. I think if you look at the forwards that they did acquire at the deadline, and you can put Noel Acciari in that mix as well, a lot of kind of positional versatility. So, David Kampf is going to be a starter in the playoffs, whether that's, in fourth line, third line. But they have these other pieces that can, they can move around, can be versatile. But look, I thought Lafferty was a great pickup because of everything he brings, right? He's one of the fastest players in the NHL, and he's tenacious with that speed. And I think the idea of pairing him with a William Nylander, he knows his role pretty clearly. It's to use his speed to get back, win pucks in the neutral zone and then get that puck to William Nylander and let him do the kind of heavy lifting in the offensive zone. I think if you're Sam Lafferty, you're probably up for this challenge as well. After playing on a Chicago team that didn't have a lot of success, you probably relish in this opportunity to play with players like Nylander. But Yeah, I think the Leafs have kind of always wanted to try him at center. Always, since they acquired him, I think they've wanted to try him at center, and I guess opportunity knocks for him, right?
What's your take on Kerfoot getting bumped up to the first line and Bunting going down to the fourth line? Is this Keefe sending a message to Michael Bunting?
It is, and I think it's an opportunity for Michael Bunting, to kind of rediscover his game, right? I think Michael Bunting's game has slipped because he's had trouble walking that line, and it's a line that he walked really well in his first season with the Leafs. How to draw penalties, how to not take too many penalties, how to play pesky, and get under the opposition's skin without it being a harm to his own team. But he's really just teetering on that line right now. So I think it's an opportunity for Michael Bunting to, play with players that are going to be eager in Pontus Holmberg and Alex Steeves, but really show off more of his offensive game. And I think that's what's been lacking, a lot. I think there's a bit of a I don't know if crisis of confidence is the right term, but I do think that Michael Bunting has been struggling to kind of get back to where he was. And look, it's tough because if you're Michael Bunting, your rep precedes itself, and I think as his name and his game has kind of grown in the league, more and more referees are kind of getting wise to his approach. So I think that's probably hurt him a little bit. And I think in terms of Alex Kerfoot, I know he's become a bit of a whipping boy in some corners of Leafs Twitter. He's been snake bitten by chances. It's pretty clear he's having a tough time kind of finishing, his opportunities in front of the goal. But he's a remarkably smart player. We know he's a versatile player, and I think he's been fairly consistent this season. And so if you're Sheldon Keefe, you want to give him a chance, but also, I mean, they're not really spoiled with options. And, when you have O'Reilly out, when you have Tavares out, you're not really spoiled with options on who to play in that top, line role. I don't think Alex Kerfoot is the answer for the first line left wing job come playoff time. I think, if all goes according to plan, Michael Bunting rediscovers his game. He starts producing a little bit more, and he probably finds his way back into that first line role. I think that's something Sheldon Keefe also made clear yesterday at practice, that role is kind of there for him to get back. So we'll see. Again, there's not a ton of options, so this is kind of what you have right now. But I do think it's an opportunity Alex Kerfoot deserves.
I mean, that top line's been odd all year long. Obviously, Bunting's been hot and cold throughout. Matthews being good, obviously 200-foot player, we keep being told, but they're still very good, but not a 70-goal man. On the right side, it's Marner or it's Nylander. With Matthews, is it going to be a case of end of the season, end of the playoffs, we find out there's been something more serious with him? Is it physical, or is it more than that?
Well, I think we're at that point in the season where everybody's dealing with something, right? John Tavares took that pretty heavy hit from Tyler Myers, and he was saying today he woke up feeling not like himself. Out of an abundance of caution, the team is holding him out for tonight's game, so it's entirely possible. The thing that sticks out with me for Matthews, I guess it's a question for Leafs fans. Would you rather have a Matthews at a 70 goal pace, for example, but then his defensive game slips, or would you rather have a player that is kind of building an identity as more of a playoff ready performer? And we're seeing that, like you said, Sharms with his 200-foot game, which to me is there. It doesn't show up on the score sheet, but his defensive game has really taken strides. It's hard, right? Because you win the Hart Trophy and you're expected to move mountains afterwards. But I do think the way that Austin Matthews is playing this season, it really seems like it's a style of play that is going to be more suitable in the playoffs. And look, and that's all that matters for the Leafs right now. I think they have other weapons, and if you're Austin Matthews, is hard, right? For all of us, we only have so much hard drive space, right? So you can add these important defensive elements to your game, but then something else has to give, right? And I think people are expecting the world out of the player, rightfully so. He's one of the best in the world. But I think we've seen, some other Leafs kind of elevate their game in terms of production. William Nylander is having the best season of his career. You could say the same about Mitch Marner. So I don't know. Personally, I don't know how concerned I am about Austin Matthews not scoring at the torrid pace he did last year, if it means that come playoff time, he's better suited to play in those kind of tighter games, right?
Josh, who's Morgan Riley's best defensive partner?
I mean, if I had that answer, I would be, I guess in a higher tax bracket. Look, that's a really, really difficult question. And I think if we're looking at the problems that the Leafs or Sheldon Keefe have to solve heading into the playoffs, that's got to be near the top. Because Morgan Riley isn't coming out of the lineup. Morgan Riley is going to play, as many minutes, if not more, of any Leafs defenseman. Maybe TJ Brody pushes him. But how do you get the best out of him? I think what you have to do is put him with a stable partner who can allow Riley to do the things that make him a special player, which is carry the puck, deep into the offensive zone, create that rush game. Play a little bit more of a risky style. Someone pointed out on Twitter recently that the criticism of Morgan Riley is becoming very Jake Gardner-esque. Again, I use the term whipping boy, but it seems like there's always one of those players, and he doesn't get nearly as much credit for what he does well compared to how much stick he takes for the defensive errors he makes. The question is a tough one. Is it Luke Schenn? And then if it is Luke Schenn, who is a more stable, obviously physical, defensively minded defenseman, are you going to be able to get, nearly the same amount of minutes out of Luke Schenn that you're going to ask of Riley? Probably not, right? Is it Timothy Liljegren? He doesn't seem to have the full confidence of Keefe right now. So I don't know. I mean, if it's TJ Brody, which on paper makes a lot of sense, then you're kind of the rest of your defensive lineup takes a bit of a hit. So again, lots of moving pieces around. I think, if you want to just play the greatest hits, I think TJ Brody makes a lot of sense. But then who are you going to play with? Jake McCabe? That's why that's, I think, one of the biggest questions heading into these last 19 games.
A lot of questions need to be answered down the stretch for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Thank you so much. It's Joshua Kloke of The Athletic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Have a good night.
Scott Foster throws out Scottie Barnes. Fred to OG. He's got to shoot it. Does, and that's going to do it. Raptors fall.
Just said something to myself, and then I guess he took offense to it, so it just threw me out of the game. Just like normal talk, I felt like I got fouled on something, so I just told him about it a little bit. But I guess they were just mad. I don't know.
Scottie Barnes at the end of a controversial finish between the Raptors and the Nuggets. Joining us now is Randy Urban, host of Raptors Tonight. Randy, Scott Foster is a big talking point coming out of that game, unfortunately, because the Raptors played a really good game for the majority of the time on the court against Denver. Scott Foster saying Scottie Barnes was ejected on one technical foul because he used verbiage that which directly questioned the integrity of the crew. What did you make of that call in the final seconds of the game?
Well, I didn't like the call because, the foul didn't really even have to do with Scottie. But he must have said something. And I don't think Scott Foster would just throw out a player sitting there with zero technicals just because he said something, not nice. He must have said something that kind of crosses the line for NBA referees. And Scott Foster thought that Scottie did that. It's just an unfortunate way to end the game, though, just because the Raptors had been playing so well. There were a few calls that just didn't go their way. They ended up being, I would say, more or less right in theory, but I think some calls that maybe shouldn't have even just been made. They should have just been play-ons, in my opinion. But yeah, that was just not a good way to go out to end the game. I think Scott Foster has to have a little bit thicker skin in those moments, and I think Scottie has to not put himself in those positions, especially late in the game on the road.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Randy, it's the NBA, right? These guys talk. It's part of the game. We understand that. But Scottie Barnes is a young player. He's still learning his trade to a certain point, and he is a bit of a mouthpiece out there. Let's not kid ourselves. Is it a learning experience, though, for him, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. These are all teachable moments for these guys. You know, Scottie does have a tendency to get into it with other players, get into it with referees occasionally. I think that's just part of his makeup. I don't think he does it with any malice or intent to, damage any other person or damage the play of his team. He's just kind of that guy. Those are the types of things that get him going. And so, you have to figure out where the line is. And Scottie in his second year is trying to figure that out. Now, the unfortunate part is you're not afforded the same luxuries that, say, in our show, Jack Armstrong mentioned LeBron James is. So Scottie's got to realize that, there are certain things you can say and certain things you can't, and when you can say them matters as well. So it's definitely a learning experience. I know Nick Nurse in the post-game media session sort of backed up Scottie's position, basically saying there was nothing there. And it seemed like there wasn't really anything there, but something must have caught Scott Foster's attention for him to kind of, walk towards the scores table and then, quickly turn and walk right at Scottie and eject him like that. So I appreciate the standing up for players in that regard, but, probably something was said.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, we're not professional lip readers, but you have to assume something was said considering Foster was walking away. But there was some questionable calls, and you start looking at some of the numbers, and you see 9 free throws inside the last 1:15 of the fourth quarter going Denver's way. But let's get off Scott Foster and all those calls. Let's talk about the Raptors and their performance, because I think they played extremely well. This is a team that, I would say, pre-All-Star break, probably wouldn't put in a performance like this against the best team in the West, yet they go to Denver in the altitude against Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets. You have a player who's most likely going to be a third straight MVP in the league. How many positives can you take away from that performance?
I think you can take a lot away from it. The unfortunate part is that there are only a handful of games left. So every loss is crucial and every win is going to be even bigger than that. So, you can take solace in the fact that you played probably one of your best games of the season. But at this point in the season, there's not moral victories. There are no moral victories. You have to get wins. You have to try to get out of this play-in situation and solidify the 6th seed if you can. And I think Raptor fans are just waiting for this team to go on a run. And it's just unfortunate that in the times of the season where it feels like they are going to go on a run, something like this happens. And I know we don't want to talk about the calls too much more, but, there was a couple of moments there, or there's one more moment there that I think changed the complexion of the game last night. And the Raptors were playing so well. Jokic gets tied up with Scottie. It felt like Jokic hooked Scottie.
Yeah,
felt the contact, which is something he does, quite often, and it's a veteran move and it works. But that call was challenged by the Raptors and unsuccessfully, and that I think changed the complexion of the game. That to me is. It's hard to say who committed the foul, but that to me is a no call. You just let them play on, especially at that moment in the game. And so those types of things are frustrating when you're trying to put together a win, probably your best win of the season. You're trying to put together a winning streak. You have 2 tough games in LA coming up, and then you come home and you still have the Denver Nuggets again. So that game, that win, there was so much on the line for the Toronto Raptors and for the Toronto Raptors fans that it's a little bit hard to swallow. And so how do you take that going forward? I think you have to certainly remember just the first 46 minutes of the game, but also you have to try to lock in a little bit more in the last 2 minutes. This has been a team over the years that have thrived, in my opinion, in crunch time, in moments where they needed to get a stop, in moments where they needed to get a bucket. I felt like this team has been better over the past few years, but this year specifically, for some reason, they haven't done well in these late game moments. And, I look at you're up 6, which is not a great lead in the NBA with 2 minutes to go, but it's still a lead. And so you give up a 3 to Jamal Murray. Okay, fine. You come back, you don't get a great shot. They come back. Jamal Murray basically walks in for a layup. So there, all of a sudden, it's a 1-point game. You commit a foul on the other end. They're going to the line to take the lead. This all happens in 45 seconds. I know the NBA is fast. I know the game is at a different level right now, but at some point you have to not let that happen. You have to not give up 6 or 7 straight points in 45 seconds. I don't know how you do it, but you can't do it.
Well, Randy, especially when you're facing Jokic and you hold him to 17 points and 9 rebounds, which is good numbers for most players, right? But for him, very below average numbers. Really great job by OG for most of that game, which just, rubs more salt into that wound, right? You hold the best player arguably in the league to those numbers and you still lose the game.
Yeah, and they did a great job on Jokic, but this is what good teams do. When it's winning time, they win, and Jokic made all the right plays at the end. He made his free throws. The Denver Nuggets have not just one star in Jokic, but they have a bona fide star in Jamal Murray, and he might not be playing at the level that he was before, but he is getting very close. The last 6 games, he's averaging 23 points, and he's just a gamer, right? He just wants the ball at the end of the shot clock. He wants the ball at the end of the game, and he delivers in those moments. So against those types of teams, you have to be extra focused and extra locked in to not allow those things to happen. But yeah, it's just a tough Raptor loss. I would have liked for them to get Fred involved in those last few possessions somehow, because he was having one of his best games of the season. He was getting guys open. He was creating for himself. He was just having an all around good game. So you can look at this and say, good effort, but that win would have put them in 8th position. They would have leapfrogged Atlanta. So you get in that 7-8 position, then you have 2 chances in the play-in to get it done. So it's a big loss.
Yeah, Jamal Murray was incredible. Michael Porter Jr., I think, deserves a shout out as well. He was almost automatic from three-point land. I want to touch on Fred VanVleet. Another really good game since coming back off that little break. 21 points and 14 assists. The turnovers a little bit more than we're used to with Fred VanVleet, considering just 2 turnovers in the past 3 games before that. But does he have to be at his best for Toronto to even have a shot of not only getting into the playoffs, but potentially upsetting a team?
Yeah, for me, Fred is the X factor for this team, because the Raptors don't have a lot of guys that really can create their own shot without too much difficulty. Pascal can get whatever he wants, generally speaking. Scottie has a good low post game where he can get, efficient shots down low. But essentially, Fred VanVleet is the guy that's going to get the other players in spots to make them successful. And he was just a master at that last night. And so when I look at what this team is capable of, it's really going to be as far as Fred takes them, just because of the way he sets other guys up, but also the way he can knock down shots. He can play off the ball. He can make threes, as we saw in the game against Washington. And in that game, you really get a sense of what Fred can do, because he's having a great game. He misses 2 threes late in the 4th quarter and then buries 2 threes that were huge in overtime. So he's just one of those guys that's unbothered by the moment. He's not one of those guys that's unbothered by the pressure of missing the last shot, which can, accumulate over the course of a game. And so when you have a guy like that, you need him to be at his best, and you need him to be functioning at a high level, especially with this Raptors team, which doesn't have, as I mentioned, the types of creators to get their own shot that you would maybe like.
I mean, and this is the crux of the season, right? It's such a tight NBA this season, fighting for these final playoff spots, for the play-in. Huge games coming up for Toronto. We saw them, of course, split the series against Washington. Denver last night, of course, it continues Wednesday and through the weekend. Gary Trent is a player who kind of fails to deceive on many occasions. Off the bench last night, scored points, looked really, really good at times. Has Nick Nurse got to find a way to get him more minutes on the court?
Well, this is the difficulty. Yeah, James, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was thinking about that last night when, he's on the bench, and vice versa the game before when Jakob Poeltl was on the bench. Basically, you're going to have to make a decision between those 2 players, because the other players you really can't take out late in the game. Like Fred has to be in there, Scottie has to be in there, Pascal has to be in there, and of course, OG, their best defender, has to be in there. So you got to roll the dice at times. Last night it kind of hurt the Raptors when Jakob Poeltl got fouled because he's not a great foul shooter and he missed 2 free throws. But then you give up size if you put Gary Trent in, but you're also adding shooting. So this is why these coaches get paid the big bucks, because this is a difficult decision to make. But Nick Nurse has had a great way of playing this by feel, just seeing how the guys are going at that moment in time, and also just playing hunches as well and knowing what his players are capable of in what moments. So I like Gary Trent out there, but because I think he's the most natural shooter on the team. I think when the ball leaves his hand, you think it's going in, and that's a great thing to have. I think that he doesn't need to be out there for long stretches of time to be comfortable, to make shots. As we see when he comes off the bench, he's basically hot right away. If he's not hot, he's going to shoot till he's hot, which is a good thing for guys that are coming off the bench. But Jakob Poeltl is perhaps one of the smartest guys in the league, and he just plays so efficiently and so with knowledge of the situation. And he does all these little things, and you can see how much he's opening up the inside by rebounding, by clearing other guys out, just doing all these other things that the Raptors were missing this season. So it's hard. It's really hard. I think there are moments where you're going to have to play them both, and maybe somebody else sits like Scottie, or Fred's not having the greatest night. Maybe Fred sits at those moments and have Scottie run the point. But this is a problem, but it's a good problem to have because there's going to be multiple different situations where you have to go with multiple different lineups.
Yeah, all players getting on the score sheet last night for the Toronto Raptors. Jakob, another good night, 18 points. Randy, thanks so much for doing this. And if you want to follow Randy, head over to Twitter @UrbanRandy, and you can watch him on Raptors Tonight after every Toronto Raptors basketball game. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, welcome back to the Homestand Show, and we've reached the end of the show, James Sharman. It was a good show. Thanks to our guests, Joshua Kloke and Randy Urban, for coming on. Leafs in action tonight. The Raptors off night, but back in action tomorrow night against the Clippers. Sean, our producer Sean, come on in. Let us know how we did on the show.
Yeah, let me just put up my mic there. Yeah,
lighting is much better than yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, hey, you guys give me some criticism. I try to work on it. The sun is coming in out of the northeast.
Yeah, so when you go in closer, you look more like Jeremy Reed or Powder. Remember that?
Powder, that was a great movie.
It was a great
Quite
movie.
emotional, actually.
Yeah, no.
It was a sad movie.
It was a sad. I haven't been struck by lightning or anything either. So yeah, no, I again, you give me some criticisms and I work on it. Just similarly, like you guys make fun of my bets, I try a little harder. That doesn't seem to work, but we'll see how it goes. It was a good show today, though. You guys brought it.
10 games on the ice tonight.
Yeah.
Have you looked?
Yeah, I took a little peek.
What do you got? Tell the people what you got here.
You know what? I mean, you guys have talked about it all show. The Leafs are a bit injured, coming in a bit undermanned. I'm going to roll with the Devils in regulation at plus 118.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
if you don't feel safe, even the money line's good at like minus 132 or something like that. So, that's where I'm rolling for my best bet, or as you would say, my worst bet.
Yeah, Sean's worst bet of the night. I just have this feeling this has a 4-1, 5-1 Toronto Maple Leafs beatdown. The Devils win the game.
You think so? But if you remember when they last had injury crisis and Matthews was out for a few weeks, they played really well. They tightened up defensively.
Yeah.
And I think without Matthews, actually, they've got a good record. Without JT, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, they're missing 2 key guys. I kind of get the feeling maybe they're done with this road trip. They're ready to get back home. No Luke Shen. Not that he's been a huge part of this team for a long time, but
yeah, some good stats on the last game of a road trip, because it's been a long road trip, right? And those new players too want to get to Toronto finally and settle down. I mean, as much as it's great to be traded to a team on the road because you can gel with your team and all that, I think at the same time it's got to be pretty tough. You've got family considerations. You want to find where you're going to live, so it'll be interesting. But yeah, I've got my gut, which has never served me well in the past, tells me we might see a Leaf win tonight.
Really?
Yeah.
Plus 114.
Low scoring affair, yep.
I love a good road dog. But don't discount the Devils. Listen, 2 points out of the top spot in the Metro behind Carolina. Timo Meier makes his debut, scores a goal. I can see a couple goals from him tonight.
You have no faith in that Leaf defense, do you?
No. Not tonight. Not tonight. I like the Devils. All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming to the show. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, James Sharman. This has been the Homestand Show. We'll be back tomorrow.